it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. It has been said that everyone's a mad scientist, and life is their lab. We're all trying to experiment to find a way to live, to solve problems, to fend off madness and chaos. Tonight's two stories give us an insight into such madness and chaos. The Erebus Project. A factor you may have come across while browsing the internet is that blind people don't see blackness or darkness. We see nothing. If you're sighted, you don't see darkness behind you. You just don't see anything at all. That's what it's like for me. I've been completely blind since birth, and vision's always been a very foreign, abstract concept to me. I've never known light or darkness. But that changed when I volunteered to be a test subject for a project named Erebus. I received a phone call last November from someone claiming to work for a private research firm called Noir Laboratories, saying they got my information from the NHS. They were looking for subjects with varying degrees of visual impairment to test something they called an luminiferous chamber, and wanted to know if I could come in for an in-person assessment. They were willing to pay me £50 just to come in, and another £1,000 for the testing if I qualified. I had my brother help me research them to make sure it wasn't a scam. We came to the conclusion that it was a small but legitimate operation. It was a little vague exactly what they did, but their primary research projects appeared to be moonshots based on fringe science. That was, admittedly, a bit of a red flag, but it didn't make the prospect of £1,000 any less tempting. I figured going in for an assessment couldn't hurt. My brother took me to the clinic, as I'd never been there before, but since I had no idea how long it would take, I didn't see any point in him hanging around. I assured him I'd be fine on my own, and I'd call him when I was ready. In retrospect, that was a mistake. They were ready for me as soon as I got in. I consented to them viewing my medical records, orally answered a questionnaire, let them prick my finger for a blood test of some kind, and submitted to an eye exam to confirm I was 100% blind. During the questionnaire, I did hear a very odd sort of mechanical whirring voice. When I asked what it was, they told me it was an old scanner someone was using. At the time, I assumed, they meant a document scanner. After all of that, I was given a one-on-one interview with a woman who introduced herself as Ms. Noir. I stifled a chuckle at what I assumed to be a very obvious pseudonym, given her company's name and its mysterious nature. But I suppose there are people named Noir, so maybe it was just a happy coincidence. I've finished going over all your information and test results, and I think you'd make an excellent test subject for Project Erebus, she said as I heard the creak of expensive leather upholstery from her sitting down in her office chair. I couldn't help but take note that the guest chair I was in was of much lower quality, which told me a great deal about how Ms. Noir viewed her underlings and test subjects. She smelt strongly of cashmere, so I presumed she was also well dressed, along with smelling fastidiously and immaculately clean. Her voice was fairly young, mid to late 20s. She spoke in a properly aristocratic King's English accent. I suspected she was a posh little trust fund baby who'd used her familial wealth to finance this particular startup of hers. I assume you have some questions before you agree, I heard her say, and realized I'd zoned out while she was still speaking. Well, I'm not really sure what the project even is, I replied, nervously fidgeting with my folded cane. A luminiferous chamber just sounds like a fancy name for a darkroom. Have you ever heard of anechoic chambers, Marissa? She asked me over the sound of her fingers softly tapping on a touchscreen. They're the most soundproof spaces in existence, the quietest places in the world. They're so quiet you can hear your own organs move. Most people find the experience quite unnerving and can't stand to be in one for more than an hour. Well, electromagnetic anechoic chambers exist as well, and they don't have the same psychological impacts as the acoustic ones do. Our luminiferous chamber doesn't just block all light, doesn't just absorb all light, but is literally a space where light cannot exist. Photons are still created and survive long enough to enable chemical bonds between atoms and molecules, but are obliterated so quickly that if you shone a torch right into someone's eyes, it would never even reach their retina. Obliterated? By what? I asked curiously. Have you ever heard of luminiferous ether? She asked in reply, taking a sip of what smelt like saffron tea, and never asking me if I'd like some. Yeah, I think so. It's a discredited theory about light existing solely as a wave in an otherwise undetectable medium, right? I said, uncertainly. Discredited isn't the term I'd use. Scientific theories are never fully proven or disproven beyond dispute. They're merely adjusted to accommodate new evidence, she said with authority, her teacup clanking against the saucer as she put it down. Yeah, of course. I smiled weakly, wondering what kind of pseudoscientific nutter I got myself involved with. So, you're saying that your luminiferous chamber works by modifying the luminiferous ether so that light can't exist inside of it? That's, the gist of it, yes, she answered, her chair creaking again as she leaned back in it. And as a result, it's the darkest place in the universe. Do you know that the human body is luminescent in the infrared spectrum? That means no matter where a person goes, they always have light with them, even if they can't see it. But just as the sound of an anechoic chamber makes previously inaudible sounds quite noticeable, we found that the absence of any ambient light at all allows for the emergence of some rather novel phenomena that have hitherto gone unobserved. What kind of phenomena? I asked, suddenly concerned. For the sake of the experiment, I'm afraid I'll need you to be going in completely blind, she replied. I waited a beat for her to say, no pun intended or no offense, but she said nothing. Well, am I going to be in any sort of danger? I asked. Not physically, no, she assured me. Psychologically, though, it's a bit unclear. All of our other subjects, all sighted, found the absolute darkness extremely disquieting and were unable to tolerate it for more than a few moments. You, though, well, you can't see darkness. You see nothing, and we'd like to know what effects, if any, our chamber has on you. And I'm not going to be exposed to any kind of dangerous radiation or chemicals or anything like that. It's just, a luminiferous ether, I asked, hoping I wasn't coming across as too incredulous. Yes, and it's completely harmless, she promised. All you have to do is sit in a dark room for as long as you can, and you'll walk away £1,000 richer. I pondered my options for a minute. It was obviously the quickest, easiest £1,000 I would have ever made. But what if it was dangerous? There was no such thing as luminiferous ether, so Ms. Noir clearly had one or two screws loose. Whatever this luminiferous chamber actually did could very well be dangerous. But then again, it might not be anything at all. She did say that there had been other test subjects, and unless she was blatantly lying about that, then surely one of them would have notified the authorities had they suffered serious harm, or the next of kin would have if they'd died. Right then, so, where do I sign? She slid me a waiver and non-disclosure agreement, in Braille and non-Braille versions, and after reading them I signed and initialed wherever she pointed my hand. I've been told I have a doctor's handwriting, but just making a mark is good enough for legal reasons. Once the legalities were out of the way, she led me down the hall into Project Erebus's luminiferous chamber. I was walked straight into it and told to sit down upon a chair, without being provided any description of the device itself. I can echolocate a little bit, though, and I got the impression that the chamber was round, maybe a couple of meters in diameter, with a very hard and smooth shell. Once I was in place, Ms. Noir slid the door shut, and it sealed with a distinct hiss. That made me a little nervous, since it led me to believe the chamber was airtight, but otherwise I didn't notice any change. I'd assumed that it would be a sensory deprivation chamber of some sort, but I could still hear muffled movement on the other side. The voices were largely indistinct, but I did hear Ms. Noir give the very clear order to turn off the lights and turn on the dark. The chamber started to hum, a very eerie, unnatural humming that wasn't quite like anything I'd ever heard before, It sent a chill down my spine. And that's when things started getting really weird. Have you ever heard white noise that you didn't notice was there until it stopped? Well, I suddenly felt like something was gone, something that had always been there but I'd never noticed, like a fish who never knew what water was until they were taken from it. The perfect darkness that I felt enveloping me was creepy, but not immediately alarming. It was an alien sensation, and I didn't know what to make of it. As it grew stronger, I increasingly got the impression that it was something abominable, something eldritch, something that wasn't supposed to exist, that couldn't exist under the laws of the nature as I understood them. And then I realized why this new sensation seemed so very foreign to me. It was sight. I wasn't just feeling this otherworldly darkness, I was seeing it. I don't understand how, but the first and only thing I ever saw was the primordial darkness inside the luminiferous chamber. I was horrified and confused, but also curious, so I didn't ask to be let out of the chamber just yet. I stared into the impenetrable darkness as deeply as I could, and the longer I did so, the longer I got the feeling that something was looking back at me. Now that I could see this darkness, it, or something in it, could see me. I took a sudden, deep, reflexive gasp, loud enough for my echolocation to let me know that the chamber no longer seemed only 2 meters wide anymore. I couldn't sense the walls at all. I think that was because my brain was devoting all available processing power to make sense of this vision of darkness. People like me who've been blind from birth or young childhood really do have more acute non-visual senses, because our visual cortexes have rewired themselves to more thoroughly process our remaining sensory input. Now, I was experiencing the opposite of that. All my other senses going numb as my visual cortex attempted to fulfill its intended purpose. It really was a cruel irony. I could see for the first time, and there wasn't one photon of light to see with. When I most needed my remaining senses at their keenest, they were dulled as the novel darkness demanded so much analysis from my brain. I tried to fight it, tried to listen, tried to echolocate to figure out what was in the darkness with me. Instead, I felt hot, fetid, rancid breathing on the back of my neck. I screamed and jumped out of the chair, my only thought to bang and scream on the chamber door until they let me out, or I knocked it down myself. But it wasn't there. It should have been just 1 or at most 2 strides in front of me, but it wasn't. The darkness I'd found myself in was somehow far larger than the chamber itself. Terrified beyond all reason, I ran as fast as I could, not knowing what lay ahead, but desperate to escape from whatever was behind me. But I couldn't escape. It wasn't chasing me, for I heard no sign of pursuit, but I couldn't gain any distance on it. No matter how fast I ran or in what direction, I could still hear its ragged breathing right behind me, still smell the odor of death and decay it carried with it. It was in the darkness, a part of the darkness, and I could not escape that darkness. It became harder and harder to breathe as the stench of the thing intensified, and eventually I dropped to my knees, gagging and retching, at the mercy of whatever was there in the dark with me. I unfolded my cane and started swinging it around me in a last-ditch effort to defend myself, but it never made contact with anything solid. "Who's there?" I demanded, tears of desperation pouring down my cheeks. Maybe in response to me, or maybe not. It came closer, close enough that my echolocation was enough to get a vague sense of its dimensions. It was an uneven, oblong shape about the size of a person, suspended vertically about a foot off the ground. It was pockmarked with various orifices that wheezed out foul-smelling vapors, the entirety of its form expanding and contracting greatly with each labored breath. It shuddered in what seemed like pain with each exhalation, but was otherwise quite lethargic and sluggish. It was right in front of me now, mere inches from my face. I was shaking, trembling, sobbing uncontrollably. What was this thing, this bizarre, otherworldly alien thing. And what did it want? Did it mean me harm, or was it simply investigating an intruder into its territory? I just wanted it away from me, and since I couldn't flee, I decided that my only option was to push it away. Reticently, I slowly raised my hand and placed it upon the entity's body. Its flesh was soft and moist like kneaded dough, and warm like it had been left out to rot in the hot summer sun. It didn't react to my touch, so I pushed my luck harder and gave it a subtle nudge away from me. It didn't move 1 inch. Instead, I felt an eyeless human face emerge from the mass, its mouth hanging agape and askew. I screamed and fell backwards, trying my best to scuttle away, but still unable to put any distance between myself and that thing. And then, the face started singing. It wasn't screaming exactly, but a ghastly, unnatural-sounding wail that carried with it the slightest hint of harmony to indicate that it may have been music. And then another voice joined the chorus, and then another, and another. It sounded like the creature was forming new faces all over its body, every one of them singing their soul-shattering hymn. More voices came from behind me, another one of the creatures emerging from the darkness, already with a multitude of faces to join in the choir. At least 3 more drifted in from the sides, and I was completely surrounded now. Their voices just grew louder and louder. I clasped my hands to my head in a desperate attempt to block it out. Oh, they're going to deafen me, I thought. No, please, God, no. I can't be blind and deaf. Please, no. Helplessly, I laid in the darkness, enduring the acoustic assault of the strange monstrosities that had accosted me, with no means or hope of escape. Mercifully, it seems that the technicians attending to the experiment were neither ignorant of nor apathetic to my plight. In an instant, the singing stopped and the darkness was replaced by the complete absence of sight that I had known all my life. My ears were still ringing from the ghoulish music, so I didn't hear the door open, and I barely heard the lab assistants as they tried to console me and help me to my feet. What I did hear was the same mechanical whirring I'd heard earlier, this time accompanied by a bunch of excited jargon that meant nothing to me. They were scanning me and had scanned me earlier, and were perfectly fine with doing it without asking or telling me. It made me wonder if I hadn't just escaped from one den of monsters to another. A little over half an hour, and a quick debriefing later, I was back in Ms. Noir's office. My hearing was back to normal, but I was badly shaken. I didn't fully understand what I just experienced, and I still don't. I heard Ms. Noir walk in and smelt that she had a mug of steaming hot chocolate with her. This time, though, she put it down directly in front of me. "That's from my personal stash. You won't find that in any shop you'll ever set foot in. On the house," she said, a soft hint of sympathy in her voice as she sat in her chair. "What the fuck just happened?" I demanded. "Marissa, I think I owe you an apology," she sighed. "I thought that since you were blind, the effect of the chamber would be negligible, even non-existent. It seems it actually affected you more severely than our sighted subjects, likely because you didn't have the luxury of confusing the darkness you were seeing with something mundane." "But how could I see anything? And what the fuck was in there with me?" I demanded. "The darkness, the pure, true darkness created within the luminiferous chamber is primordial, so fundamental that any conscious entity can perceive it, with or without visual sensory organs," she claimed dubiously. "As for what was in there with you, that's a tad more speculative at this point. We think that they've made some form of dark matter, a shadow ecosystem, and maybe even civilization composed of a kind of matter that doesn't interact with our own. We're completely invisible to each other, at least under normal circumstances. But when we create a space of true, primordial darkness without any photons, that appears to allow for at least a degree of interaction. Our sighted subjects, they experience things as well, but not like you. I think it may be because you experience the darkness in a way that they just didn't, and maybe through some kind of observer effect, you and those creatures became more real to each other than was ever otherwise possible. I let a word sink in for a minute. Those creatures, those monsters I'd encountered in the chamber were everywhere. They were everywhere, we just couldn't interact with them. I had experienced something that was otherwise impossible in that chamber, encountered the denizens of a shadow earth that I never should have met. Bloody dark matter aliens. And you didn't think that was something I needed to know before I agreed to this? I asked bitterly. You said all I had to do was sit in a dark room. I could have lost my hearing. I could have been killed. Yes, it seems our initial risk assessment was a bit off. We're willing to compensate you for that financially, she told me as I heard her flip open a checkbook. So long as you understand that none of this invalidates your liability waiver or non-disclosure agreement. I scoffed in disgust and reached for the cocoa she'd given me. It was rich and delicious and did calm me down a little. Even if I could somehow find a lawyer who'd take on such an outlandish case, or a court that would hear it, what chance would I have in a lawsuit against a firm with the resources to literally bend the laws of physics to their whim? Yep, I understand. I nodded with a dejected sigh. Ever since then, I've been a blind woman who's afraid of the dark. I sleep with my bedroom light on now and always carry an LED light in my purse, because if I'm in the dark too long, I start to feel that same warm, fetid breathing on the back of my neck. I think Ms. Noir was right about there being some kind of observer effect involved in this. The shadow creatures and I know about each other now, and we can't unknow each other. This anchors us in each other's realities just enough that we no longer need perfect darkness to interact. Just regular darkness is enough for us to start to faintly perceive one another. Maybe they don't actually mean me any harm. Maybe they're as afraid of me as I am of them. But I don't think so. Maybe it's just because they're so strange, but I can't think of them as anything other than monsters. And I suppose that one day, when the lights finally do go out, I'll find out for sure. The Lazarus Project. I'm an antiques dealer. It's the job that pays the bills, but most of the time I come across incredibly boring and often ugly things that I can buy cheap and turn a profit on. Throughout my career I've found a few strange artifacts, and I've made some decent contacts that'll help me discover lost items, for a share of the profit, of course. Sometimes I'll even get called to different countries, which is fine because I quite like to experience new cultures and see what weird things people leave behind there. That being said, recently I've come across a pile of documents that all describe something called the Lazarus Experiment. And while I'm still waiting to find out its authenticity, I thought I might as well share it with you fine people. So, below are a few entries that I picked out. I'm not exactly sure what to make of them. November 10th, Day 0. I've always been a man of few words, but this past week has been so full of peculiar events, I've finally decided to keep a journal. Even if never read by anyone, my thoughts will still exist on paper. An oddly comforting thought. Currently, I'm being moved to a secret facility. They've told me it's some sort of bunker situated deep underground, one where I can finally realize my full scientific potential. Seeing as I'm in the back of a covered truck, not being able to see outside, I can only say we've traveled for about 12 hours at this point. It all escalated so suddenly earlier today, when the state decided that I can be of some help to their cause. Unrest has been on the rise lately, all around the country, and everyone knows in their heart that war is inevitable. Honestly, I've never been into politics. I consider myself to be apolitical, and I believe the rumors were, exaggerated. At least I did until last night, when vandals broke into the university building, where they completely wreaked havoc upon my office and left obscenities on the walls. several slurs and warnings to, get out of town. I cannot fathom why they hate me so much. I am a simple physicist with some, slightly unconventional ideas. As I entered my office this morning to clean what remained, I was approached by two men in shiny new military uniforms. At first I was confused as to why they were with the military and not the police. I, naturally, assumed they were there to question me about the events that had transpired the night before, but they, showed no interest in that. I have to say, they were extraordinarily polite young men. The military usually treated people like myself with much less respect. These men, however, treated me as an equal. The older of the two was a man of higher rank in the military. He told me my work was well known to them and that I had a unique opportunity to serve my country, not on the front, nor on any battlefield, but in a state-of-the-art laboratory. I couldn't say no to such an offer. I've learned throughout my life that denying the state is a bad idea. Those who do are oftentimes taken away, never to be seen again. Time and discretion was of the essence, meaning I would have to leave with them immediately. I demanded to see my family, but they simply told me to write a letter and they would ensure that my wife received it. Dearest Leia, I've been requested by the state, due to my research. I wish I could tell you this in person. However, our country is no longer safe. We all know a war is coming. Everyone has to contribute to protect those we love, even if not on the battlefield. Well, it's a great honor, but I leave you with a heavy heart and a longing in my soul. I will be back soon enough to see our son take his first step. I think we should name him Adam. Maybe I'll even be there for his birth. I love you always. Yours truly, Elazar. I'll finish my first entry here. The driver says he will arrive shortly. November 12th, Day 2. I've been guided throughout the facility today. There are 12 floors, all underground, but I will remain confined to the 4th floor. I've never seen such sophisticated equipment, and with it, I can finally prove my theories. The director of this facility is a military man, an aged soul like myself, but still as strong as ever. He's been put in charge of monitoring the work happening here. The name will be the Lazarus Experiment, a bit grandiose for my taste, but I will happily follow orders after being given this gift. Another thing, which I found quite odd, was my new fake name. The director said it was for my own safety, as this work should never be linked to any of us. So, from here on out, I will call myself Peter, as long as I remain on the premises. November 17th, Day 7. For the past 5 days, I have attempted to explain the physics behind my project. During the meetings, I got the feeling that none of them liked me very much, well, all except for the director, who managed to convince them all to have faith in me. He said my experiments were essential to our cause. It's quite simple, actually, I told them. I do not wish to alter reality, but rather to create a rift through time itself, and bring people to our time just mere moments before their deaths. By doing this, they will live, but events from the past will not change at all, because they are taken away, rather than being killed. Of course, this requires some knowledge about when and where they died, which limits the capabilities of the machine I will build, but nonetheless, it will change the course of history. In a few days, the director will grant me full control over the 4th floor, with a crew of 17 to help me conduct my research. June 22nd, Day 955. It's been almost 3 years since I entered this wretched facility. On the way, We have faced so many setbacks, I almost lost faith. The thought of being without my family rendered my mind useless. I just wanted to see them once, but my superiors refused me that privilege. By now, my son has been born. I've missed his first words and first steps. I just hope he's healthy. I've also overheard some chatter. The director has mentioned another project on several occasions. It's just been a whisper here and there, but they call it Operation Barbarossa. No matter, I know the war is raging and many lives have been claimed. Soon my machine prototype will be ready. Maybe then we will end the war and I can finally see my beloved family again. November 3rd, day 1089. It worked. It finally worked. My machine, my theories. I was right. Last evening we decided, after months of planning, to finally try out our prototype. On our first attempt, we would not bring back any more than 7 subjects, all from the front lines of the battle. Our goal was to monitor their reaction from being brought back from the dead. Every superior, including the director, was present during our first and most important test. I was honored to flip the switch, and I smiled excitedly as I did so. A part of me worried that the machine would not be able to handle the vast force we put on it. That alone is unlike anything ever created in our world. The pylon started rotating at an accelerated rate, quickly reaching as much as 10,000 rotations per minute. The machine held together gracefully as a bright blue light shot out from its core, illuminating our anticipating faces. We stood in silence for 10 minutes, the light increasing in intensity for each passing second. Soon it was too much to look at directly, as if staring at a brilliant blue sun. Suddenly, 7 small portals appeared, scattered around the laboratory. They were dormant for a few minutes, but then, out of nowhere, 1 man fell from each portal. Their bodies slumped down on the ground, where they lied silently. My crew ran over to check on their vitals. Sure enough, they were all alive, but unconscious. Upon looking at their IDs, we could confirm their identities. All had died in the same battle, although not knowing each other. Now they were by our side, unscathed from the war. It's an achievement that will be remembered for millennia to come. No longer will lives lose their husbands to battle. No longer will children have to grow up without a father. I have saved them all. November 10th, day 1096. Each man we brought back remained asleep for about a week, but this morning they all awoke almost simultaneously. At first, not a single one uttered a word to us. They remained awake, but completely unresponsive to our inquiries. We prodded them and shook them, but nothing happened until exactly 3 hours after their awakening. The first man we interviewed spoke of his death. He had been shot in the chest, which punctured a lung. Despite his injury, he couldn't bleed out. His blood had frozen on the cold battlefield, leaving him to gasp for air until he finally froze to death. He had died alone, without anyone to comfort him during his last moments on Earth. It was impossible. If my machine worked correctly, he would be brought back just before that fatal gunshot. Yet he remembered the events surrounding his death. The man knew he should be dead, but didn't appear shocked or at all surprised to be sitting with us without a single scratch. He was calm, but also anhedonic, joyless. Tonight, I'll sleep uneasy. This experiment no longer feels like a hopeful attempt at saving lost souls. No, something sinister lurks in the portals of the dead. December 12th, day 1128. I'm finally beginning to realize the magnitude of my mistake. It has now been approximately 1 month since the first subjects awoke. I cannot bring myself to call them human anymore, not after what I've seen them do. They are simply no longer who they used to be. When asked whether they would continue the war effort, they seemed unafraid and careless about any harm that might occur, even though they'd already experienced the pain of death. They have lost their most basic human instinct to stay alive. They are all dead now, all save for a single soldier we have isolated in a padded cell, a place where he is unable to hurt himself. It's our own fault, of course. We failed to monitor them at every hour of the day. 3 of the 7 subjects hung themselves in their rooms. 2 others repeatedly smashed their heads against the wall until their skulls cracked. And the final subject somehow got hold of a gun. The last one haunts me the most. He had a gun, but he chose not to shoot himself in the head. Instead, he opted to shoot himself in the gut, firing all 8 rounds of the pistol. It took him 2 hours to bleed out, and through it all, he never spoke a word. He just stared at us as we tried to help him, emptiness filling his eyes. Despite this major setback, the director is still confident in our cause. He claims, with modifications, we can fix the machine and bring back healthy subjects to fight in our war. September 8th, day 1763. As time goes on, I've almost forgotten the feeling of sunlight warming my skin, or the face of my beautiful wife. She was always too good for me. A monster like myself doesn't deserve any pity or salvation. It's been almost 2 years since our first batch of people were brought back from their deaths. Since then, I've modified my machine to bring back a much larger scale of soldiers. 23,154. A number I will never allow myself to forget. That is the number of soulless men I have helped bring back. Men that were immediately sent to one of the 2 fronts we're currently fighting on. I can't imagine the horrors of fearless soldiers fighting without a cause, not longing for love nor freedom. Even in such a large number, it's hopeless. War has no winner. I pleaded repeatedly with the director to shut the project down. I told him the Lazarus experiment was a pointless way of prolonging death, that these men were no longer human. But he was adamant we continue. And I follow orders, in fear of what will happen to my family if I don't. June 6th, day 2035. The war is lost, were drunken yells that echoed through the hallways of the facility. The director stumbled across the concrete floor, almost shattering his bottle of wine against the wall. The other superiors quickly escorted him away. Me and my crew were kept in separate rooms, while the superiors assessed the situation. After a few hours of waiting in anticipation, a guard entered my room and announced that the experiment was over. I was relieved, to say the least. After more than 5 years, I would finally be able to go home and see my family. I asked to see the director one last time to say farewell and thank him for the opportunity. I do not look up to him as much these days, but he served his country like I did, and for that, he deserves my respect. The director was sobering up when I met him, still a bit worn out from the alcohol, but clear enough to speak his mind. He told me I was a great scientist that should have gotten much more out of life than I did. He told me he was sorry, but that he had no choice but to send me away. He even shook my hand before I left. I wouldn't be going home. The superiors told me it was due to the war. They said I would be sent to a camp where my family was waiting for me, the only place that was still safe for people like myself. Doesn't really matter where I go, as long as I can see my wife and son. I wonder if he'll even know who I am after all these years. I wonder what my wife has told him about me. I've never heard of the place I'm heading. The guards call it Auschwitz. I hope it's nice. So, my dear friends, bit of a intense week really, to be honest with you. Yeah, the bathroom renovations, refurbishments that have been plaguing me for the last 2 weeks are finally finished, which means, of course, most importantly, I can have a shower. But, well, equally importantly, I can get back to a full recording schedule. Now, it's amazing somehow for me to have even got any videos out for you, because the noise has been insane these last couple of weeks. But I've muddled through, and I hope you haven't seen anything wrong with the schedule I've been keeping. But yeah, I've got a lot of 2-3 hour stories lined up, and I just haven't had a chance to do them recently, but that's going to change from now on. So, another thing, the podcast has come out, first one, and that'll be continuing once a week, anywhere you find your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a gazillion other different places. Dr. Creepin's Dungeon is up and running. Links in all the video descriptions from now on. Well, that is enough for me from tonight, so, but I know I'm back to a free and open recording schedule, so praise be. Which means a lot more stuff coming up in the next few days, few weeks, months, years, however long I can keep this going. Thanks for sticking with me. Content now available in many different forms. So if you like podcasts, if you like Spotify, anything like that, you now know where to find me. Look at those links in the description, damn it. Well, until next time, which might be tomorrow night, if I'm in the mood, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye.